President and Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Reagan, and honored guests, as Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Reagan Library, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the grand opening of the Air Force One Pavilion. Ronald Reagan dreamt that one day this Air Force One might be on display in the Presidential Library, and today his dream comes true. This plane, known as 27000, served as the flying White House for 7 presidents of the United States, from Richard Nixon to George W. Bush. It carried Nixon to the Middle East, Gerald Ford to the Far East, Jimmy Carter to the return of the 52 American hostages, and Ronald Reagan on his historic trip to Berlin. Every president for the past 3 decades has used this plane on important missions on behalf of our national interest. It's flown nearly 1 million miles and has not lost a single piece of luggage. Tail number 27000 is one of the most distinguished veterans of the Cold War. It was the vehicle President Reagan so effectively used in his face-to-face summits in Geneva, Reykjavik, and Moscow that led to the collapse of Soviet communism and the triumph of freedom across Europe. Each of these stories are great lessons in American history, but the purpose of this new museum is not just to recall the past, but to inspire future generations of American leaders. This is more than a retired aircraft. It's a symbol of American strength and the awesome global responsibilities of the President of the United States. We are delighted today to be joined by several of the pilots and crew members who so proudly flew this presidential aircraft on missions around the globe. They're among the greatest pilots in the world, but I'm still wondering which one of them did this perfect 3-point landing. This undertaking could not have been possible without the dedication and support of so many people. Topping the list, of course, is President Bush. It was his administration that agreed to make this unique piece of American history available here in California, becoming one of the few historic military aircraft on display in the western United States. We started off with a plan to build a simple hangar, but ended up with this architectural marvel. It was under the leadership of library trustee Bob Tuttle that this magnificent facility has evolved. Bob's not able to be with us today, but he sends his best wishes from his new post as ambassador of the Court of St. James in London. In building such a spectacular facility as this, there arises the important question of how do we pay for it? We didn't want to become another airline operating in bankruptcy. But thanks to the tremendous work of Terry Lanny, who's chairman of the Reagan Library Finance Committee, the necessary funds have been raised. It's been wonderful that an American aerospace company that built this special aircraft has been such a great partner in helping us move it here. Our thanks go to Boeing for all of their support in relocating and reassembling Air Force One here on this hilltop. And finally, any project of this magnitude takes a great team on the ground and a visionary leader to get the job done. Duke Blackwood has been the leader of this project, and I have to tell you, this is the first time in months I've seen Duke without his hard hat on. He's worked tirelessly, and he's put his heart into this, and has truly taken ownership of the project. And that may explain why the license plate frame on the back of his car says, "My other car is Air Force One." Thank you, Duke. When President Reagan was aboard Air Force One, there was always the jar filled with his favorite Jelly Bellies, a pile of newspapers, the most recent White House briefing, and his favorite flight jacket. But President Reagan was only truly at home on Air Force One when Nancy Reagan was in the passenger seat next to him. She represented America to the world, who grew to love her overseas as much as we do at home. Her smile warmed the hearts of school children from Moscow to Manila, from Bangkok to Berlin. I now have the honor of introducing a remarkable woman of grace, courage, and quiet strength, President Reagan's favorite traveling partner on Air Force One and all of his life's journeys, Nancy Reagan.
The old adage that time flies certainly is true today. Standing before this airplane brings back so many wonderful memories. It reminds me of the 8 years we spent as frequent flyers aboard this plane, which carried us to every corner of the globe. It seems like yesterday that Ronnie and I took our last flight aboard Air Force One, and as we headed west for what Ronnie playfully called retirement, I can still see him peering out the window in our cabin as he watched Washington disappear against the landscape. And as we crossed America and approached Los Angeles, I knew Ronnie was thinking about another exciting chapter in our journey together, which began 52 years ago in that very city. Retirement would never be. Our life's work would be this library and all it might become. Looking back on that last flight, I'm reminded of how difficult it was saying goodbye to the people who had meant so much to us. As the champagne was poured and glasses were raised, someone shouted, "Mission accomplished, Mr. President, mission accomplished." Those words were so meaningful that day, and I believe they're fitting today as we stand in the shadow of this airplane. The completion of this project is the realization of Ronnie's dream to attract individuals from all walks of life to his library so they might learn about the presidency and American leadership in the world. I'd like to thank every single person who shared his vision for that day. So many of you contributed your time and talent and resources to this project, and for those gifts, I'm truly grateful. And it's wonderful that many of the men and women who served aboard the plane are also here today. The pilots, stewards, talented crew, members of the United States Secret Service, and those who served in government during Ronnie's presidency. This achievement is yours as well. And as visitors climb the stairs to the door of this airplane, I hope they'll feel, as Ronnie and I did, every time we arrived on foreign soil in faraway countries, or returned safely home to American shores, grateful for our many blessings. So I will simply conclude by saying, on behalf of Ronnie and me, thank you and welcome aboard.
Today, President Bush shares Ronald Reagan's belief in the importance of face-to-face diplomacy. He's flown nearly 400 missions on the newest generation of Air Force One across the country and around the world. We will never forget his 44th mission aboard Air Force One. It was September 13th, 2001, to New York City. With that visit came comfort, courage, and a resolve to stand up against terrorism. Air Force One mission number 204 was a brave and bold visit to Baghdad on Thanksgiving Day 2003. The President's secret trip inspired our soldiers by showing that their Commander-in-Chief stood by their side. And most recently, President Bush has made numerous trips to the areas devastated by hurricanes, bringing relief and hope. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce the President of the United States.
We're great fans of Nancy Reagan. We admire her strength. We admire the love she has for her husband, and we're grateful for your friendship. Thank you, Mrs. Reagan. And I appreciate the invitation to come back to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. And I'm proud to stand in this magnificent pavilion that is now home to a celebrated symbol of democracy and freedom. You know, across this nation, Americans can visit many great memorials to the cause of liberty. From a statue in a busy harbor whose arm carries high the flame of freedom, to a quiet field in Arlington filled with rows of white tombstones, to a mountainside in the heartland carved with the images of America's great leaders. Each evokes a sense of awe and wonder, but none can soar at more than 500 miles an hour, carrying freedom's message across oceans and continents. It was President Reagan's dream to share Air Force One with the American people by bringing this plane to his presidential library. Now, as this pavilion opens, Americans will have the chance to experience firsthand the majesty and the power of this incredible aircraft. I want to thank you all for making this possible. This is an important contribution to the history of America. I appreciate Fred Ryan, the chairman of the Board of Trustees, and I want to thank all the trustees who are here. I thank Duke Blackwood, the executive director. I appreciate Rob Zuka. He happens to be the Air Force One project specialist, the guy who got the work done. Traveling with me today is Colonel Mark Tillman. Fred mentioned the flight into Baghdad. He was the pilot flying me into Baghdad. I've always found it's a good thing to praise your pilot. I appreciate former Governor Senator Pete Wilson being here. It's good to see you and Gail. Thanks for coming. Former Attorney General Ed Meese and Ursula. Members of the United States Congress, some of whom, all of whom I'm about to mention, jumped on Air Force One yesterday to fly from Washington to Los Angeles. They've heard it's quite comfortable. Elton Gallagher and his wife Janice. Elton is the congressman from this district. David Dreyer and Dana Rohrabacher, thank you all for coming. I know Mayor Paul Miller's with us. Mr. Mayor, thanks for being here. We appreciate you coming. The only advice I have is fill the potholes. We're proud that the Archivist of the United States, Alan Weinstein, is with us, as well as Acting Secretary of the Air Force, Pete Guerin. But most of all, thanks for inviting Laura and me to be here. There is no single aircraft called Air Force One. That call sign belongs to any Air Force plane when the Commander-in-Chief is on board. And this particular plane, tail number 27,000, wore the name of Air Force One 445 times. Over 28 years in service to 7 American presidents, starting with Richard Nixon and ending with me. Of all the presidents that tail number 27,000 served, none used her more than President Ronald Reagan. It was 25 years ago this November that the American people sent Ronald Reagan to the White House for his first of 2 terms. Mrs. Reagan recalls their first time on board together, when this plane carried them from California to Washington, D.C. for the 1981 inaugural. As the president-elect attended to paperwork, Mrs. Reagan says she was busy writing letters to friends on Air Force One stationery that said this: "Look at me, I'm flying on Air Force One." In all the flights that followed, Nancy was always on the president's mind. Aides recall that whenever he traveled alone, President Reagan would bow his head in silence before each takeoff. When asked why he did so, the president replied that he was asking the Lord to take care of Nancy should something happen to him. During his 8 years in office, this plane carried our 40th president on 211 missions, logging more than 630,000 miles in the air. The plane brought President Reagan to London, where he declared to the world that freedom and democracy would leave communism on the ash heap of history. This plane brought President Reagan to Berlin, where he challenged General Secretary Gorbachev to tear down this wall. No matter how many hours he spent in the air, President Reagan never lost his sense of humor. One of his favorite pastimes on board Air Force One was prowling the staff cabin with a White House photographer in tow, looking for somebody who was asleep. He would pose next to the unknown victim and then send them a signed picture when they got home. One day, Secretary of State George Shultz received a photo of himself asleep with his mouth wide open. As the president waved his arms in mock desperation, the inscription read, "George, wake up, the Soviets are coming." President and Mrs. Reagan flew this plane together for the last time on January the 20th, 1989, when it brought them back home to California. Now, 16 years later, this plane has found a home beneath the Pacific sky alongside the president she so ably served. It's appropriate that this symbol of American strength and resilience and optimism has come to rest at the library that bears Ronald Reagan's name. After all, it was President Reagan who always reminded us that when we set our eyes on the horizon, every day is morning in America. As Nancy Reagan has said, the Reagan Library is a place the sun will never set on the principles that Ronnie believed in so deeply. Ronald Reagan's principles started with an abiding belief in the power and in the appeal of liberty. He believed that freedom is the right of every man, woman, and child on earth. He recognized that freedom was opposed by dangerous enemies. And he understood that America has always prevailed by standing firmly on principles and never backing down in the face of evil. At the beginning of his presidency, Ronald Reagan declared that the years ahead would be great ones for the cause of freedom and the spread of civilization. He dismissed communism as a bizarre chapter in human history whose last pages were being written. For 8 years, he acted on that conviction, and shortly after he left office, the Berlin Wall came down, the evil empire collapsed, and the cause of liberty prevailed in the Cold War. The pavilion that we open today includes a Cold War gallery where a new generation will learn about the great victory for freedom that President Reagan's leadership helped secure. They'll see how President Reagan rallied the world's democracies to defend liberty against the totalitarian aspirations of Soviet communism. They'll see how his strategy and vision secured a free and peaceful Europe. They will learn that the key to victory lay in our resolve to stay in the fight until the fight was won. As President Reagan put it in his Westminster address, while our military strength is a prerequisite to peace, the ultimate determinant in the struggle will be not bombs and rockets, but a test of will and ideas, a trial of spiritual resolve, the values we hold, the beliefs we cherish, to which we are dedicated. Because of Ronald Reagan's leadership, America prevailed in the 20th century's great struggle of wills. And now in this new century, our freedom is once again being tested by determined enemies. The terrorists who attacked us on September the 11th, 2001, are followers of a radical and violent ideology. They exploit the religion of Islam to serve a violent political vision, the establishment of a totalitarian empire that denies all political and religious freedom. These extremists distort the idea of jihad into a call for terrorist murder against Christians and Jews and Hindus and against Muslims from other traditions who they regard as heretics. Like the ideology of communism, our new enemy is elitist, led by a self-appointed vanguard of Islamic militants that presume to speak for the Muslim masses. Like the ideology of communism, our new enemy teaches that the innocent can be murdered to serve a political vision. Like the ideology of communism, our new enemy pursues totalitarian aims. Like the ideology of communism, our new enemy is dismissive of free peoples, claiming that men and women who live in liberty are weak and decadent. And like the ideology of communism, Islamic radicalism is doomed to fail. It will fail because it undermines the freedom and creativity that make human progress possible and human society successful. The only thing modern about our enemy's vision is the weapons they want to use against us. The rest of their grim vision is defined by a warped image of the past, a declaration of war on the idea of progress itself. And whatever lies ahead in the war against this ideology, the outcome is not in doubt. Those who despise freedom and progress have condemned themselves to isolation, decline, and collapse. Because free peoples believe in the future, free peoples will own the future. We didn't ask for this global struggle, but we are answering history's call with confidence and a comprehensive strategy. We're working to prevent the attacks of terrorist networks before they occur. We're determined to deny weapons of mass destruction to outlaw regimes and to their terrorist allies who would use them without hesitation. We're depriving radical groups of support and sanctuary from outlaw regimes. We're stopping the militants from gaining control of any nation, which they would use as a home base and a launching pad for terror. And we're draining the militants of future recruits by replacing hatred and resentment with democracy and hope and freedom across the broader Middle East. We will prevail in the war on terror because this generation is determined to meet the threats of our time. We understand our duty. We understand our responsibility to the American people. There will be tough moments ahead on this path to victory. Yet we have confidence in our cause because we have seen America face down brutal enemies before. We have confidence in our cause because we have seen the power of freedom to overcome the dark ideologies of tyranny and terror. And we have confidence in our cause because we believe, as President Ronald Reagan did, that freedom is one of the deepest and noblest aspirations of the human spirit. Thank you all for having us. May God bless Ronald Reagan, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.